Chapter 1. The Biased Societal Stigmatization of Addicts and Why It's Unfair. Our understanding of addiction is too narrow because we tend to think of addiction as only experienced by certain people, those we label as addicts. This label implies that they are different from the rest of us. They may one day rise above their addictions, but for now they belong in this category. In truth, addiction is primarily produced by the environment and circumstances. Addictive behaviors have existed for a long time, but they've become more common, harder to resist, and more mainstream in recent years. New addictions don't involve the direct introduction of chemicals into the body system, but they produce the same effects because they are irresistible and well-designed. Addictions like gambling and exercise are old, and some are relatively new, like binge viewing and smartphone use. But they have all become progressively more challenging to resist. The societal definition of addicts is based on one school of thought that depicts addictions are meant for those labeled as addicts or junkies. This stigma placed on these certain sets of people automatically distinguishes them from society at large. Addiction is generally caused by environmental factors, genetic factors, and repetitive exposure. Nobody is immune to addiction. Everyone is one step away from one behavioral addiction or another. Addiction has been in existence from the onset, but it has become more prominent and profound in recent times. Indeed, behavioral addictions and substance addictions are very similar. They activate the same brain chemicals and are ignited by the same needs, such as societal relevance, mental stimulation, and confidence boost. If these needs are stripped away from people, they're more likely to develop behavioral and substance addictions. Throughout this summary, we will address how to coexist with addictive activities that form our everyday lives, without allowing them to take over. We will discover how to recognize addictive behaviors and mitigate their effects on happiness and well-being. Chapter 2. The birth of behavioral addictions has created a common problem. A modern societal definition of addiction stigmatizes addiction as a very bad character. Behavior is only said to be harmful and addictive if it causes extreme disruption and negative effects on a person's life or those around them. Addiction is a brain disease characterized by compulsive substance use despite harmful consequences and is difficult to abstain from. Behavioral addictions do not involve substance taking, such as smoking, drinking, or injecting something. They arise when an individual can't resist a behavior and, most significantly, has a negative impact on society. There's a significant difference between addictions, obsessions, and compulsions. Addictions promise immediate effect, whether positive or negative. In contrast, obsessions and compulsions are harmful and dangerous pursuits. These are hard things to break and often lead a person into negative behaviors over the long term. An obsession can push a person into the darkest corners and make them feel like they have no control over what happens next. It's not something they can simply choose not to do. A person with an obsession or compulsion will often require a specialist's help to overcome it. In 2003, research by 7 Canadian psychologists, one of the researchers, Robert Vallerand, wrote, "Passion is defined as a strong inclination toward an activity that people like, in which they invest time and energy." As the word stipulates, harmonious passions are peaceful and healthy activities done by people without causing havoc in society. In this type of passion, individuals are not forced or compelled to do such activities, and it is in total harmony with the individual's daily activities. On the other hand, obsessive passions are often dangerous and harmful, and they're driven beyond the pleasure they bring. A person with an obsession cannot abstain from carrying out the activity that fuels it. In turn, behavioral addiction occurs, along with general disruption in a person's life. Did you know? In a study on young adolescents published in the Industrial Psychology Journal, researchers found that about 74.5% were moderate internet users and 0.7% were addicts. Those with excessive use of the internet were found to be prone to anxiety and depression. Chapter 3. The mechanism of behavioral addictions and how it affects you. Behavioral addiction involves a compulsion to engage in rewarding non-substance-related behavior. It is sometimes called a natural reward, despite the negative consequences which can be physical, mental, social, or financial. How do we become addicted to certain behaviors? They are caused by the disruptions that occur in our biological processes. 1/6 of the world's total adult population is deprived of good sleeping habits, resulting from blue lights that emanate from electronic devices. For many decades, blue lights existed during the day, and the red lights produced at night were a signal to the brain signifying bedtime. Blue lights from the onset meant daytime. Usually, the pineal gland buried deep in your brain produces a hormone called melatonin at night. Melatonin makes you sleepy, which is why people who suffer from jet lag take melatonin supplements before bed. When blue light from your smartphone or computer hits the back of your eyes, the pineal gland stops producing melatonin and your body prepares for the day. Science has shown that addictive behaviors produce the same brain responses that cause drug abuse. One of the primary reasons for drug abuse is the gain of intense pleasure. The chemical responsible for intense pleasure is called dopamine, a feel-good neurotransmitter. The chemicals released by the brain can fuel or help with addictive behaviors. Dopamine is released by the brain when we have sex or eat food we crave. This contributes to feelings of pleasure and satisfaction as part of the reward system. Most of the time, the brain releases only a small dose of dopamine, but certain substances and addictive experiences send dopamine production into overdrive. From the very beginning, the excessive release of dopamine is transferred into pleasure. Still, with the frequent release of this chemical, the brain will adjust to reduce its secretion. This reduction of dopamine leads to a dramatic loss of pleasure. More consumption will be required to up the total pleasure gained, hence causing the consumption of a drug or activity, which in turn causes addiction. Chapter 4. The ingredients of behavioral addiction are quite surprising. Behavioral addictions are most likely to begin the same way drug or alcohol addictions do. Natural chemicals such as dopamine flood the brain whenever an addict engages in such activities. Most people tend to participate in social media and video games without getting addicted, unlike vulnerable people who find themselves craving and participating in these actions at unhealthy levels. Goal setting is one of the most effective methods to achieve self-motivation. Goals are what drive the brain and mind to achieve specific things. For example, playing video games will require beating your high scores. Likewise, opening a Facebook account will require you to have enough friends online. These goals are what make humans unconsciously addicted to certain unhealthy behaviors. What makes a behavioral addiction so hard to treat is that these activities are deemed acceptable in society. For example, it's challenging to abstain from using the internet because it is pervasive in modern society. However, humans are social animals, and it is only right if they engage in social activities such as making friends online, playing video games, and surfing the internet. Still, it is rather unhealthy if the time spent online and with screens outweighs the time spent with face-to-face interactions. These behavioral addictions will only hinder the young generation from having real-life experiences, thereby harming their social lives. Seeing the world as others see it, known as social confirmation, proves that you belong to a group of like-minded people. Evolutionarily, members of a group tend to survive while loners are picked off one by one. As a result, discovering that you look like other people is very reassuring. One recent study suggested that up to 40% of the population suffers from some form of internet-based addiction, whether to email, gaming, or porn. Adam Alter. When people are deprived of these social bonds, they experience pain so severe that it's sometimes called the social death penalty. It's also very long-lasting. Just remembering a time when someone excluded you is enough to rekindle the same agony, and people often list cases of social exclusion among their darkest memories. Chapter 5. Nipping addictions at birth is vital for the health and well-being of children. The elementary stage of a child's life is critical in building the mental, social, and physical aspects. Children are more vulnerable to addiction than adults because they lack controllable traits. If a child is not adequately monitored and controlled, addictions are possible in the early stages of life. Child addictions include video games, social media, television watching, etc. Hilary Cash, a therapist specializing in addiction, suggested in her book Video Games and Your Kids, How Parents Stay in Control, that kids should not be exposed to screens before the age of 2. She argued that their interactions should be direct, social, firsthand, and concrete. These first 2 years set the primary standard for kids on how they will interact with the rest of the world. She also vividly stressed that kids should be allowed to watch television sparingly until they reach elementary school. Cash further advised that limiting screen time is critical. This will allow the kids to face other essential activities in their lives, such as sleeping, doing physical exercises, spending time with family, and, most importantly, succeeding in mental development. The problem isn't that people lack willpower, it's that there are 1,000 people on the other side of the screen whose job it is to break down the self-regulation you have. Adam Alter. The American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP, made further adjustments to this argument. They added that young children learn best by interacting with the real world, and instead of restricting kids from screens, it enumerated 3 benefits of healthy screen time. First, parents should encourage their kids to relate what they see in the screen world to their real-world experience. This screen-to-reality bridging is known as the transfer of learning. It improves learning for 2 reasons. It requires children to repeat what they've learned and encourages them to generalize what they have learned beyond a single situation. If a dog on the screen is the same as a dog on the street, the child learns dogs exist in many contexts. Second, it is better to actively engage than view passively. An app that requires children to act, remember, decide, and communicate with their parents is better than a TV show that allows them to absorb content passively. Third, screen time should always focus on the content or the app rather than the technology itself. Chapter 6. Behavioral Patterns and Configuration Explained. Behavioral patterns in humans are the potential and expressed capacity of human individuals or groups to respond to internal and external stimuli. Behavioral patterns differ from person to person. What a particular person is addicted to may not affect another. Each person's ability to resist the temptation of addiction also differs. Those who tend to try and withstand the temptations of engaging in addictive activities fall more often than those who avoid temptations altogether. According to Wendy Wood, a psychologist at the University of Southern California, willpower is about looking at those yummy chocolate chip cookies and refusing them. A good habit ensures you're rarely around those chocolate chip cookies in the first place. The problem isn't that people don't have willpower, it's that there are thousands of people on the other side of the screen whose primary task it is to make you abandon your self-regulation. Distractions play a major role in trying to overcome behavioral addiction. When you replace a habit or damaging addiction with something else that has an equal reward, you're choosing a positive route. The best way for this principle to work is to use the golden rule, different strokes for different individuals. A process that works for one individual will not work for the other, so finding out what works is paramount in making sure these processes are effective. That is, working out what made the original addiction rewarding. Sometimes the same addictive behavior can be driven by very different needs. Suppose you were trying to avoid using Instagram. Each time you're enticed to use the platform, you can either tell yourself, I can't use Instagram, or you can tell yourself, I don't use Instagram. Behavioral configuration acknowledges that you can't escape temptation completely. You can't stop using your phone altogether, but you can aim to use it less often. You can't avoid checking email, but life should be compartmentalized, so refreshing your email account isn't always an option. There's a time for work and tech, and another for unencumbered vacations and social interactions. Many of the tools that drive our addictions are deeply invasive, so we should be vigilant. Conclusion. In our modern era, where addictive technology is part of the mainstream, no one is safe from becoming addicted. Self-denial is not an option, but there are other ways out. We can restrict addictive activities and cultivate good characters that promote healthy behaviors. Once behavioral addictions are fully understood, the harm can be curtailed, and the positives can be harnessed for good. Addictions are dangerous and harmful since they crowd out other essential pursuits and goals, from career aspirations to basic hygiene and social communication. There's much to do to restore the balance that existed before the age of emails, wearable technology, social networking, smartphones, and on-demand viewing. As social animals, we need to cultivate meaningful relationships with the people around us. We're not meant to be isolated islands. However, the addictive online friendships that attract many young gamers and internet users are dangerous, not for what they provide, but for what they can't provide. A chance to learn what it means to sit next to one another as you maintain a conversation. In essence, the world's entire population is addicted to one particular substance or behavior. The most common form of dependence is a behavioral addiction, and we are all addicted to one behavior or another. However, the best way to work out addictive habits is to understand how, why, and when we first develop and then escape behavioral addictions. We would gradually work our way out of behavioral addictions in the world of sophisticated technologies by doing this. Try this. Disable work email accounts between midnight and 5 in the morning. Games, like books with chapters, should come with natural stopping points. Children should be introduced to screens slowly and with supervision.